Hi everyone, this is Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I'm here today to talk to you about creating a long gradient of color on your skein of yarn using a blank. Now frequently you might see these long tubes of knit fabric that you can unravel and knit from. Frequently you see them called sock blanks because they're made with 1 or 2 strands of sock weight yarn knit into a tube, so that way you can unravel and knit your socks 2 at a time. But I created this blank on my Singer knitting machine out of bulky weight yarn, so maybe I should call it a bulky blank. But either way, we are going to use it to create a long gradient of color because by the way we're going to dye it, it will be darkest at one end and lightest at the other, and with a gradient of stuff in between. So then when we knit from it, we will have a long continuous gradient of color. And to start off, I'm going to start by just pre-soaking this in just plain water for at least 30 minutes or until the fibers are well saturated. So we've got here 8 cups of water with 3 tablespoons of white vinegar, and I'm going to start mixing up our dye. I'm going to add seven drops of yellow food coloring. I'm going to add a lot of green. That's 25 drops green. We've got a very green color. Let's add another 5 drops of green and some more yellow. That's another 10 drops of yellow. We'll see if we have something that's more limey than just a straight green, or whether or not adding that yellow made much of an effect. And so we are going to bring this to a boil, and then I guess I'll be back. So we're at a bit of a rolling boil. We don't need it to be that warm, so I am reducing the heat. And I'm going to I drained the excess water out from our blank, our knit blank here, and I'm going to start by dipping one end into the dye bath. And then slowly going to dip the rest in. And then I'm going to pull a lot of it back out. I'm setting this aside to get a spoon to help me. I'm going to dip in. And back out. All the while folding it over the dye pot so that way any excess dye goes into the skein. And quickly dip the whole thing in and then pull back out. all while leaving part of it in the dye bath entirely. And so it's important, I'm just going to get my pair of tongs because this is getting a little warm. What's important is that we keep moving it up and down, but we put it back into the pot in the order with which it comes out. And so I'm not sure if you can already tell, but we have a bit of a gradient going on. Get a better hold of this end. There we go. So you can see this is fairly light. This is already much darker. And so we're just continuing to dip it like we would dip if you've ever made dipped candles. And then this might be familiar to you. And what I'm doing with my tongs is as I go in, I'm wrapping some around. And this, when I'm wrapping around, is yarn that I'm not going to put back in the dye pot again. I didn't want there to be white at the bottom. I wanted there to be some coloration all the way through. Now we also don't want to cause too much agitation because we don't want anything to felt. But what also helps is each time we bring it down, there's less and less dye in the dye bath because more of it will have absorbed the yarn, and you can already see the difference in shade just from the tip of these tongs. And so you could wrap around the spoon. You could do many things. You can also create gradients of color without doing this kind of dip dyeing that I'm doing here. You can create gradients by creating some dye and then slowly diluting it and then hand painting the yarn, or the blank, I guess in this case, since we're creating a really long gradient. You could paint that with all shades of one color. And so that's another way that you could get a nice gradient. Let's see, we're getting darker. I'm just unwrapping to see how we're doing. Now, unlike a few of the other dyeing experiments, I'm not expecting that we're going to have the water run clear here because we're not staying in consistently long, but I've wrapped in a different way so you can try to see the gradient that we're getting. But you can also, might be a little hard to tell, but we have actually cleared a lot of the dye out of the pot. And if I just remove everything entirely, it's a bit, you can see that we've got an awesome gradient color. So now I'm going to turn off the heat and bring this over to this plate that I have in back. And what I'm going to do is carefully unwind the blank. Bring you over so you can see. And we start off with a very pale green, and then it goes to this darker color with intermediate greens along the way. And so we're going to let this cool off, and then we will wash it. Now it is time to wash our blank. I'm going to start off by putting it in some cool water. And you can see that there's a tiny tinge of green, but most of the color is thankfully staying in the yarn. And now we will proceed to wash it. I'm just using some dish soap. And then once the water has completely run clear, we will hang it up to dry. The blank is dry and the colors radiate out from dark to light. And then roll it so you can get a different sense of the way that the colors move. But now all you need to do to knit from it is to either unravel it, wind it into a skein, and then wrap it into a ball, or you can unravel directly from this blank into your knitting project. This is Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you for watching this dyeing experiment.